Hi, I'm Kemi Omijeh, a child and adolescent therapist. I'm also a consultant and trainer on racial identity and racial trauma. I've worked in schools and local authority in various roles my entire career. I was also a former primary school teacher. So, I bring with me my lived experience, professional insight and expertise to offer you a presentation that hopefully engages you in thinking critically about inclusive practices in your schools and starts you on a journey of being more culturally sensitive and aware. What comes to mind when I say I'm going to have the talk with my child tonight? Are you thinking the birds and the bees talk? Talking to them about something they did wrong? The talk is something I've had to have with my daughter when she was just 7 years old. The talk is the talk I am dreading having to have with my 4-year-old son when the time comes. The talk is a colloquial expression for a conversation that Black parents in white majority countries like UK and America feel compelled to have with their children. Talking to them about what it means to be a minority in a predominantly white space. The talk is often viewed as a rite of passage for Black children. It's talking to them about an awareness of their racial identity and the risks they may face due to racism or systemic biases and prejudice within significant organizations and from authority figures. Risks including Black men and boys being 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police than their white counterparts. Black Caribbean girls are twice as likely to be excluded than white girls. This is linked to a term known as adultification of Black children. Adultification bias is a form of racial prejudice where children of minority groups, typically Black children, are treated as being more mature than they actually are. A study conducted in 2017 by Epstein evidenced the fact that Black girls in the age range of 5 to 14 are perceived as less innocent. There are also disparities in the school discipline of Black girls and boys, and Black girls receive less nurturing, protection and support within the school system. Exclusion rates are also higher for Black boys. The reason for these stats won't always be conscious and deliberate acts. Sometimes they might be unconscious acts. This does not minimize the impact and the racial trauma caused. If, as I talk through those stats and research, you experience discomfort, or you found yourself questioning things, or you had what I like to call interrupting bots. Like, but that doesn't apply to my school, but there are other factors at play here. But it depends on, then I have some responses for these. Firstly, this is a common and expected response. Looking at racism is difficult and it brings up uncomfortable feelings in all of us. This can be for a number of factors that challenge our egos. Ultimately, a lot of us want to believe we're good people. We would never knowingly want to discriminate against people, and certainly not children. However, systemic racism is pervasive. Systemic racism exists. It's impossible not to be infected or affected in some way by it. That could be benefiting from it or being oppressed by it. We will therefore act in ways that are influenced by the systems that are at play. So, if we remove our ego and understand that the systems in which we exist, as well as the positions we hold, this may help with the discomfort. Another reason we might find looking at racism difficult is that we've been conditioned to either not see color or to treat everyone equally. This conditioning may have come from messages in childhood, and it is a well-meaning sentiment, but it's not actually reflective of the reality of the inequalities and differences that exist today. We are also socially conditioned not to talk about race and racism. It can be a taboo topic. Racial identity and the cultures, customs, and nuances that come with our intersecting identities is rarely covered in a meaningful way and at enough depth, which therefore limits people's understanding of racial identity and racism. Ultimately, we do need to talk about race, and that might require leaning into the discomfort. So, as I continue with this talk, I invite you to lean into your discomfort. Challenge yourself to be open to learning and reflecting on how what I say applies for you or the systems that you operate in. Let's get comfortable with being uncomfortable. In its simplistic form, there are two identities involved in any act of racism: white identity and black identity. So, if black families are having to have the talk with their black children, then white families also need to be having the conversations with their white children. The talk is a conversation I wish I never had to have with my child. In fact, there are many people who don't believe the talk is necessary, that it's too negative, or that it plants a seed and it makes children see racism. My response to that is twofold. Firstly, children are not colorblind. Research clearly shows that children not only recognize race from a very young age, but they can also develop racial biases by the ages of 3 to 5. The conversations we have with them, the way we educate them about race and racial identity, can significantly change the way our children, the future generation, engage and interact with difference and inclusion. The conversation we have with them, the way we educate them about race and racial identity, can significantly change the way our children, the future generation, engage and interact with difference and inclusion. Secondly, as parents and practitioners, I believe we have responsibility to prepare our children for the world ahead of them, not the way we wish or hope the world to be. In the same way you would tell your child to look both ways before crossing the street, or prepare them with tools and equipment to go camping, for example. It's essentially why I'm delivering this talk to you. Schools are in a unique and privileged position to engage children in a meaningful conversation and awareness on racial identity and develop tangible and inclusive practices. A common question I get asked: when do I have the talk? This will vary according to the child, but it will be easier to determine the right time if you're already exposing your children to different cultures, customs, as well as normalizing talking about difference and racial identity. Your child will tend to give you the signs for this with their questions and comments.
I think for me it was more, I'd be told things as I grow up. Like, if my mum does my hair and it's in for too long, she'll be like, oh, you know, we've got to redo it. Like, it can't be that messy. You'll get teased or something like that. Or, yeah, kind of things like that. I'd say that was kind of my version of the talk. Just kind of little things, certain things that I should do and shouldn't do. At certain times. I feel like I've always been brought up to be sort of over polite, if that makes sense. And like, on reflection, maybe I think it's to make up for like stereotypes maybe that would be placed on me.
Have I ever had the talk before? Yes, in fact, I've had it multiple times. Even now, so I have it sometimes with my parents. This talk would always be reminding myself to never stay out late at night and avoid going through alley areas, avoid going around people that I don't know. Whenever I'm involved or near the police, try and be in my best behaviour, try and keep my mouth shut if possible, but if not, try and avoid saying bad stuff that could probably get me in trouble with them.
I wasn't exactly given the kind of talk where you're sat down by your parents and you're made aware, you know, you're a black person and this is what you're going to grow up facing. I kind of grew up listening to stories from my dad or like my nana about the kind of discrimination they faced. So I kind of learned about racism through their experiences, especially as my nana, she wasn't actually born here. She was born in Jamaica and she moved here, I think, in England in 1962, and that kind of came with a lot of experiences in itself. And I think hearing these kind of things when you're younger and having that being brought to your attention, it was a very confusing thing. I couldn't really wrap my head around the concept of looking at someone who had a different skin color to yours and seeing them as a threat. It didn't make sense to me. So I kind of thought, right, I think racism is more taught than you automatically being born and having this view. That's the only, it wouldn't make sense. However, a conversation that still is stuck with me to this day is a conversation I had with my acting teacher in college, and he kind of sat me down and was like, you know, in this industry, as a black woman, people are going to try to put you in a box and you shouldn't let them. And I think that conversation was so meaningful for me because I want to kind of be that representation that there's a lack of in the industry for young black people who kind of have the same aspirations or dreams as me. Even if it's not the same, I just want them to be able to think, I have that ability. If she can do it, so can I.
Do I think the talk is important? Yes, I do believe so. I think for all the races, this talk is very educational for young kids, especially to help understand the real world society we live in, and like understand how people have different circumstances in terms of what they can do and what they can't do.
Your skin colour shouldn't be perceived as this barrier that prevents you from doing something that you love. And I think this is why it's so important to have these discussions with people of different races, because unfortunately, it's not just black people that experience discrimination, it's also people of other races as well. Having these open discussions is a way for us to kind of not only connect with each other on deeper levels, but it's also a way for people to understand each other better and have more respect for one another, which is really important. If we can change even one person's perception of someone's race or culture, it can make a big difference.
Maybe other races should be aware from while they're growing up about the fact that black people are given these talks and are brought up this way sometimes. I think it would help them in growing up to not be ignorant and like know about this sort of thing.
So, let's look at some terms and definitions to help us understand racial identity. Race, simply put, is how we tend to categorize humans based on their physical characteristics, typically skin color. Race is a hierarchical social construct based on the ideas created that the races are different in their biology. Ethnicity is a broader term than race. It includes race and other factors like nationality, region, culture, and religion. Heritage is a person's unique inherited family identity, values and traditions and cultures passed down by previous generations. Culture is about ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular group of people or society, ranging from family groups to faith groups. Racial identity is based on a psychological sense of self as a result of race-based experiences. It's our growing sense of belonging or identification with a racial group. All of the categories described contribute to our psychological sense of self, children and young people included. In the early years, children's understanding of this will very much be influenced by the environment and they may show curiosity around the labels given. I remember my daughter loudly correcting an adult who commented that she was from Africa. No, I'm not. I'm from Barnet, she said. This was an opportunity to talk to my daughter about her Nigerian heritage and her British identity. We also got our world globe out and looked at all the countries in Africa, of which there are 54. As educators, it's really important to consider all these aspects of children's identity in our policies and practices and how we engage with children and their families. Children naturally go through a process of self-awareness and understanding themselves and their environments from the ages of 3. The 7 areas of learning in the EYFS facilitates this quite nicely. Looking briefly at some of the areas, and here are some ideas to consider for a more culturally inclusive environment. Communication and language. You could expose children to books and other materials in other languages. You could learn the hello or alphabet song in a different language. Asking about languages spoken at home not only as a data gathering exercise, but with the intention to incorporate the child's language into their experiences at school. Expressive arts and design. This leaves itself open to so much creativity, from djembe drums to folk art to working with textiles to making sure you incorporate the origins of the artwork in any artwork you're doing. Understanding the world. I'm hoping that's self-explanatory and is taken as a real opportunity for children to understand their immediate world, their community, and the wider world. To add, how you assess a child's personal, social, and emotional development will very much be influenced by the intersections of their identity. So by this, I mean the different aspects of a person's identity that contributes to who they are as an individual, from their race, to their gender, to their abilities, and their religion and their cultures. Encouraging an understanding of this early on in children can contribute to improving empathy skills in children when delivered in a meaningful and thoughtful way. For example, a Venn diagram can be used in a creative way to explore similarities and difference in the classroom student's identity. This can then facilitate a circle time discussion about difference and similarities and understanding each other's identity. And it's a good way to normalize talking about difference. These 7 EYFS areas, which are about identity, community, well-being, learning, and communication, lends itself to us looking at racial identity, cultures, customs, and communities. Yet, I'm not certain every setting actively works to diversify their curriculum and practices to ensure that they're exploring a wide range of racial and cultural identity. This does not have to be dependent on your school or class cohorts. Some schools in England will not have a diverse cohort from different backgrounds. It doesn't mean you shouldn't consider diversifying your curriculum and practices. If you do have a diverse cohort, it's imperative that the underpinning of everything that you do embraces the diverse aspects of your pupils' identity and that you are embedding a culture of belonging and inclusion. This requires a little more consideration and effort than simply diversifying your reading books and having a couple of black dolls in the role play area. Are you aware of key dates and events to do with certain cultures and customs? What can you do during those key dates? Are you considering language barriers of those that come from bilingual homes and have English as an additional language? Instead of simply focusing on the pupil speaking English, what are you doing to make links with their parents and their carers and their home language? It does wonders for children when they are seen and heard in a meaningful way. In a school I worked at quite a few years ago, I remember a year 1 pupil squealing with excitement when she saw jollof rice on the school dinner's menu. She excitedly said, "Look, it's jollof rice. My mum cooks jollof rice." And then she turns to her friend, "Do you know jollof rice? It's a Nigerian food we eat at home. It's yummy." In what ways can you adapt your practices and classroom environment to create this powerful feeling of being seen? You are not only doing this for your minority ethnic children in your class, you're doing it for all children. All children benefit significantly from exposure to different cultures and customs. Some of the benefits of exposure to different languages include improved memory functions, and it facilitates social skills and communication. There is no escaping that children exist within a racialized society. By the age of 5, children have developed a core sense of racial ethnic identity, and they begin to explore what it means to be from one race in comparison to another. Societal biases can influence this and can undermine their self-esteem and sense of racial identity. All children need a conversation about race and ethnicity. The nature of the conversation will vary according to which group they belong to, in the same way that gender conversations will differ. Children in marginalized groups might need support understanding the biases that exist within society, whereas children in privileged groups need support understanding both the biases and the privileges they hold. Black and brown families have the additional responsibility of helping their children understand their racial identity and heritage, helping them navigate what it means to be an ethnic minority, whilst trying to get the balance right between awareness of the reality and positive racial identity. Children of both groups also need conversations that highlight the positive aspects of their identity, and that identity should be embraced and be proud of. It's not either or, and it's not about polarizing both identities. In 2022, 11-year-old Raheem Bailey's story hit the headlines. He lost his fingers from reportedly fleeing bullies after being subjected to months of racial abuse, according to his mother. In an interview with his mother, she described having to have a difficult conversation with her son, having to answer the questions, why does no one like me? Why are they picking on me? Schools have a responsibility to look at their bullying policies and practices and review how they're responding specifically to racist bullying. It cannot be the same response as other forms of bullying. The sanctions might be the same, but there needs to be meaningful action taken to educate the bully about racial identity and as well as an understanding of difference. There also needs to be space and time to reflect with the bully about the impact of their words and racism. Sanction without education and restorative practices shuts down the opportunity to learn and heal from the incidents, and it increases the chances of it happening again. We can overcome ignorance through education, empathy, and exposure to different cultures. Time and care also needs to be taken with the racially abused victim to reaffirm them and restore their confidence. They, along with their parents, need to have a clear understanding that you have a zero tolerance policy and approach to all forms of racism, from banter to microaggression to overt acts of racism. This should also apply for within your staff team. This approach can also be used for other forms of discrimination such as sexuality and disability.
I first realised I was black when I had my first talk with my mum, when I realised that my skin colour was actually more than just a skin colour.
I think when I got to high school, I first realised that I started to feel like I wasn't necessarily just a person like everyone else. I felt like I'm a black person. I don't know if that answers the question, but when I got to high school, I started to feel a bit different, I guess. Like it started to all sort of make sense.
Early childhood is where children try to make sense of all parts of themselves. There's a more concrete lens through which they engage with identity. At this early stage, it's just information. With time, they form attitudes and opinions. How this information is presented will influence how this information is interpreted. The goal for young children is to develop identity literacy and become comfortable with engaging with different identities. Adults need to be comfortable in their own identity and develop their own ability to self-reflect and be self-aware, as children will be attuned to this. Within the early years and primary school settings, we can utilize children's natural curiosity to facilitate a more inclusive and anti-racist environment and culture. You can encourage conversations that are led by their comments and observations. Even if something they say or do displays some prejudice and bias, teachers can offer immediate and appropriate responses to children who display curiosity and biased behaviors by leading with curiosity. Ask why in a non-critical manner. Don't shame them, but reflect with them. One of my favorite phrases to use with children is, let's find out. This is an invitation and an opportunity to explore and educate. If you can already correct, offer a simple correction. Challenge stereotypes by ensuring your resources, role play, and curriculum reflects this. Link conversations back to looking at similarities and differences, which can be a really good way to facilitate children in finding connections with those who differ from them without necessarily othering them. Revisit your theme topics that you regularly rotate. Could they do with some diverse representation across all subject areas? Is there a way to incorporate some cross-curricular topics? It's also important to explore if a child has a positive attitude about their racial identity and racial group, if and when the opportunity arises. Teaching is a challenging job. There are many plates you have to spin, and it can feel overwhelming to have one more thing you have to consider in your daily practices. What might help is to revisit your why you got into teaching. What was the purpose? And what influence did you want to make in children's lives? You are in a unique position to make a meaningful difference. You are the most valuable resources the children have. Your efforts are important. Each one of us can contribute to making a difference.
There were multiple assumptions and stereotypes I've experienced throughout my life, such as people saying, yeah, of course you're quick. Of course you can jump so high. Of course you got talent to play basketball to a good level. I bet you like chicken, stuff like that. People were more surprised when I showed that I had actually an interest in the arts, such as like musical theatre.
People have assumed that I'm a fast runner. People have assumed that I don't really take anything serious. I'm quite like a bubbly and fun person. I think people assume that that's the only side of me. I don't really have like these deep emotions, and like I can't really like get overly upset about things. I think people kind of take the mick out of me sometimes. They kind of just think I'll get over things, and they're not really that deep.
I don't think this is surprising, but I think this is kind of people feeding into this stereotype that people like to paint out on black girls. So I've had a conversation with people where they've been like, oh, you know, I expected you to be like really rude or things like that when I've met you, but you're actually really nice. Like you just quite seemed unapproachable. I thought you were this and this and this. And I think that kind of feeds into the stereotype of how black girls are perceived as like rude and aggressive and just all these negative connotations that I've noticed a lot of girls that aren't black, like white girls, they don't really get that. And I really do think people need to stop feeding into these kind of stereotypes because they're not accurate in the slightest. I'm just like anybody else. Other black girls are just like anybody else. We are allowed to show emotion, and it shouldn't be perceived in this negative way where it's like as soon as we show that we're upset about something or just something like that, we are automatically perceived as these aggressive and angry people whose emotions aren't valid. And then there's other girls of different colours that will show the exact same emotion and they're perceived with more lighter connotations, such as, you know, they're just sensitive or they're upset and their feelings are completely valid but ours aren't. And I don't think that's acceptable. I think something that I wish people understood about my culture is that my culture isn't the same as another black person's culture. So not every black person is the same. Yes, we have the same skin colour, but we don't have the same cultures. There are different beautiful cultures that people can explore and learn more about.
Unconscious bias is still very much prevalent in school settings. Unconscious bias describes thoughts, feelings, and actions that we hold outside of our conscious awareness and control. My difficulty around focusing just on unconscious bias alone is it can be all too easy to attribute everything to unconscious bias, when in fact, some thoughts and actions are very much intentional. What we can do is look at how unconscious bias can influence our judgments and assessments. Judgments and assessments that impact children's educational experience and their future, as well as their well-being. The YMCA published a report called Young and Black. This report highlights the experiences of black pupils in schools all over England. Of the 557 participants interviewed, 50% stated that the barriers to their achievement is down to teachers' perceptions. There are risks to having a teacher who sees you through a very narrow lens versus a teacher who believes in you and champions you. The second highest response to this was racism in schools being a barrier to black people's achievement. It's really important to review your formulations and assessment process and to consider context and culture. With experience and time, it can be so easy to become complacent and feel confident in our judgments. I'm certainly guilty of this. However, in order to be culturally competent practitioners, we should maintain our professional curiosity and incorporate open-ended questions in all of your processes, as well as questions that consider people's values and intersecting identities. The social graces is commonly used in the psychological field, and is an acronym that describes aspects of personal and social identity which highlight the intersections of people's identity. This acronym ensures you are considering a variety of categories. GRACES stands for, wait for it, it's quite long: gender, geography, race, religion, age, ability, appearance, class, culture, ethnicity, education, employment, sexuality, sexual orientation, and spirituality. It was quite long. The above categories will play a role in how children and families show up in your settings. One of the things that might be useful is working collaboratively with your colleagues on assessment and formulations and creating a framework that allows you all to question and challenge each other's assessments. Be mindful of influencing your colleagues with your own perspectives. Instead, let a fresh pair of eyes arrive at their own conclusion. Your emotions can provide insights into what is informing your assessments. What emotions do certain children evoke in you? It's not realistic to state that certain children do not evoke stronger emotions in us. Instead of denying it, use it as information. Let's use a case example to look at how unconscious bias works in practice. In 2020, Child Q, a black female child of secondary school age, was taken out of her exam at school by school staff and strip searched by female police officers. The search, which involved the exposure of Child Q's intimate body parts, took place on school premises without an appropriate adult present, and with the knowledge that Child Q was menstruating. A staff member had called the police due to the belief that they had smelt cannabis on Child Q. Smelling drugs on a minor should have been treated as a safeguarding issue, not a criminal one. Due to unconscious bias, the safeguarding rights, welfare, and psychological well-being of a child were not upheld by professionals who had a duty of care towards her. School staff were to act in loco parentis, protecting, guiding, and supporting their students should have been paramount. It's worth stating that the local safeguarding practice review concluded that racism was a contributing factor to Child Q's traumatic experiences. To add, cases like this create distress across whole communities. It really taps into what a lot of parents of black children fear: systemic racism and the impact on the safety and well-being of their children. There are many points during this incident that Child Q could have had a different outcome. Apart from the clear safeguarding procedures that should have been followed, there are other things that could have been done differently. Firstly, listen to the young person. If you have reasons not to believe the young person, consider why this is. Start with what you know to be true, with the evidence. Secondly, informed consent is important when working with children and families. Thirdly, A reminder to please always have a stance of compassion and empathy in all decisions and practices. Fourthly, slow things down. Refer to your policies and the law if needed. Fifth, ensure your staff have adequate training on the rights of a child and review ways to apply that training to practice. Child Q made the headlines, but there are a lot more children who didn't make the headlines. If we're so quick to move on from our mistakes, we miss the opportunity to learn from them. Review mistakes in your organizations or instances where you have received critique from parents. Can you re-engage with the event from a different perspective and consider what you would do differently? High-profile cases and events can also provide us with an opportunity to reflect on practice. So half-termly case discussions can help with developing our cultural awareness. Having said all of this, systemic change is ultimately what is required to address biases and inequalities that currently exist. The system requires listening to the voices of communities that are disproportionately affected by structural and systemic racism and inequalities. This can range from representation across the staffing team to consulting with professionals who can review your policies and practices. Being subjected to other people's biases, stereotypes, and perceptions is exhausting for adults. It can lead to Black fatigue. For Black children and young people, it can be stifling, affecting their sense of self and psychological well-being. They can fall into this cycle of either overworking to challenge the stereotype or overcompensating, or it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy for them. The stresses that Black children regularly experience within school systems can also impact on their confidence and self-esteem, and it can lead to poor self-regulation. Microaggressions are indirect, subtle, unintentional, sometimes intentional discrimination against members of marginalized groups. Micro by definition, but very much macro in their impact. Do not underestimate or dismiss the psychological impact of microaggressions. Microaggressions is racism. Acts of microaggressions within the school systems that need to be stamped out are mispronunciation of names or shortening it without consent, mistaking pupils of same race as each other, typecasting in school plays, touching a child's hair without consent, particularly inappropriate coming from another adult, demeaning questions, comments about religious practices or cultures, not authorizing religious-based absences, or simply not considering religious or cultural holidays in your school timetable and schedule. Not addressing racially based jokes or banter among students and the staff community. Expecting a pupil or staff member to be the spokesperson for their race or culture. Correcting children's pronunciation based on their dialect and accents. Interpreting a student's emotional responses and behavior based on their race, ethnicity, or gender. Having low expectations of pupils from marginalized communities or simply ignoring them. And finally, how you engage with particular parents. Black children will not always feel confident or empowered to address racism in all its forms, but particularly in the forms of microaggressions and jokes. Nor should the burden be on them to have to address it. Schools have a responsibility to ensure that they're creating a culture where these microacts are not normalized and accepted. Hair means something different to each of us. Hair texture, like complexion, is one of the markers of African ancestry. Black hair has a uniquely meaningful history as a symbol of survival, resistance, and celebration. It has been wielded as a tool of oppression, but also as one of empowerment. Children notice hair. They talk about hair, it informs their role play and how they categorize people. Society's perception of black hair still influences how black people are treated today. Eurocentric beauty standards have dictated that coily hair and dark skins were unattractive and inferior, whilst good hair was characterized by straighter, more European features. Afro hair has become a physical manifestation of rebellion. For a lot of black children, as well as not seeing themselves represented in popular mainstream culture and children's stories, their hair is also not represented. They can feel othered because their natural hair doesn't swish in the wind, isn't long, or changes textures and appearance when in water. Having Afro hair, the way our hair naturally grows, can sometimes feel political and like a statement, given the stigma and judgment that comes with simply having Afro hair. Institutional bias against black hair still exists today. Many schools and workplaces still have prejudice policies simply because they lack knowledge, understanding, and awareness about black hair identity. Black pupils have been excluded for having hair that is too big, too full. Pupils have been excluded for hairstyles such as fades, locks, and braids. Hairstyles that are necessary protective methods for the maintenance and upkeep of Afro hair. More than half of black children surveyed in England and Wales have been sent home for wearing their hair natural or in a protective style, while a quarter of black adults have had negative experiences in schools related to hair. In 2018, Chikieze Flanders, a pupil, was told he had to cut off his dreadlocks or leave the school. Locks are commonly associated with the Rastafari community, and they signify spiritual intent. They are a statement of non-violent, non-conformity socialistic values. It would not be permissible to insist that children lighten their skin to attend school. Yet policies that forbid black hair in its natural state or ban the use of protective hairstyles are in effect demanding the same type of assimilation. In the UK, schools can sign the Halo Code Pledge. Under the Halo Code Pledge, schools can promise to welcome Afro-textured hair worn in all its styles, including, but not limited to, afros, locks, twists, braids, cornrows, fades, and hair straightened through the application of heat or chemicals, weaves, wigs, headscarves, and wraps. Schools can commit themselves to embracing Afro hairstyles and acknowledging that it is an essential part of their cultural, ethnic, racial, and religious identities.
My hair story. So when I was younger, when I was very young, like between like when I was born and like maybe 10, 11, I had my hair in plaits, not extensions, just my hair was plaited with beads and stuff like that, cute stuff like that. And then towards the end of primary school, and I'd say mainly the first 2-3 years of high school, I started straightening my hair. Oh my god, I would straighten it every single day, and like I couldn't have it any other way. And I've just fried my hair, like it's absolutely, it like killed my curls, like my hair was dead. And I used to go to school and like I'd sweat and my roots would frizz, and like at the time I never thought of it as a thing because I was young. And I just wanted straight hair, and I think subconsciously I just wanted to look like everyone else. Like that's why I say I think high school is when I started to change myself, I guess. That was almost the realisation that I'm black and wanting to change, but this was all subconscious. Like I never had I wish I wasn't black. I never felt like that, but it seems like I just do things that are kind of like not showing off my blackness. So yeah, I'd straighten my hair all the time. And then year 9, I started to, maybe year 8, middle year 8, I started to have it in braids, just normal box braids. And then I wanted my natural hair back eventually, because I was like, I don't know why though. I think I grew out of the 1-inch straight hair. It was killing my hair, and I was on social media. The promotion of like the beauty of blackness started to come out. You know, I would see black women on my screens, and I'd be like, wow, like this could be me type thing. So I feel like I had role models, like I had people to look at and like say that looks like me, and I could be like, oh my god, like I can look like this, I can look nice and stuff like that. So I tried to get my natural hair back, and then I think year 10, I think, I feel like that is when the media started changing. Yeah, I was in year 10 in, what year was it? I'm in year 12 now. 2019 I was in year 10. Yeah. And the media started changing towards like fetishizing black women, but there was like this ideal black girl. She'd have like the nice like 3C curls in her hair. She had like light brown skin, long eyelashes. You know, there's like a type of black woman that was considered beautiful. And again, I think subconsciously I wanted to be that. So I permed my hair. I got curly perm, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it the first few months that I had it. And then my hair started to break and fall out, because I was very good at taking care of my hair, because I got my hair all natural, and like I grew out all the straight bits, cut them, like my hair was like lovely, and then I permed it, and I was able to maintain my hair. But then my hair started falling out, and I couldn't manage it because the perm was just damaging it, and I have to re-perm it like every 2 months because my hair grows quite fast. And then I was like, I've had enough. So I'm still now currently in the process of trying to grow my hair out. I stopped perming my hair during lockdown, I think, and I'm still trying to grow it out again. So I feel like I'm in year 8 again, starting the process of getting my natural hair back again. But I think now I'm much more happy with my hair. Like, I love it so much, and I really think this is the last of me trying to change my curl patterns and stuff. Like, I'm happy to like flaunt my natural hair now, because it's quite it's like a low afro. Like, it's not like the full afros, but I remember always like I just wanted it down. Like, I wanted it to sit down like the girls on Instagram. But no, I'm so happy now. Like, I think I've grown into myself a bit more in a lot of aspects. So I'm much more happy with my hair.
My hair in the past was treated as such a unique thing. Whenever I would go into school sometimes, people would like see that I've applied different products to my hair. They would always ask like, oh yeah, so like how does your hair like work? How do you treat it? Can I touch your hair? I'll let them touch my hair. Sometimes they'll see me use a comb that's different to theirs, of course, and they would always ask, okay, can I try on your hair? And let's know what it's like to experience. And it was weird to know that my hair was such a unique thing to other people who didn't like have it.
Overall, I really loved primary school. There wasn't anything that was necessarily bad. However, there were situations that were not exactly comfortable for me as a young black girl. And I think these kind of situations made me realise that I was, in fact, a young black girl. For instance, teachers mispronouncing my name a lot. This still happens to this day. Actually, I've gotten quite used to it, which is not exactly the best, but obviously my name is Kayana, and I would have teachers that obviously I've been their student for a year and they still weren't able to get my name right. And I wouldn't see my name as something that was quite difficult. I understand maybe mispronouncing on the first go, maybe the first few goes, but it was a consistent thing. And I would have to learn to speak up and correct myself, and it just still wasn't clicking, which didn't make quite sense. This is kind of when my nickname came about of Kai. My family members would call me Kai, which I was fine with, but nobody outside of my family would call me Kai. I still don't have a problem with people calling me that. However, it was kind of seen as like, well, we'll call you Kai because Kayana is just, we're not really getting it. And that kind of made me feel not valid as a person because that was my name. And I think when I was younger, that made me dislike my name as well. I love my name now. But when I was younger, I wanted a name that was quite easier to say. I remember when being younger, like when I was little, and like, you know, when you go to like get your little lunchbox and like, you know, water bottle for school, and like people would have their names on them, like quite common names, and my name would never be on them. And that made me dislike my name even more, which was quite sad. I think another thing was my hair being very different. In school, I would have my natural hair out a lot, and people would try to touch it and be like, oh, it's very spongy, it's very this. And, you know, my hair wasn't the same as other girls. The texture was different. I think this kind of ties in with my hair story, but I used to have my natural hair out a lot, and it took me a while to kind of embrace it because it was different and I didn't understand why my texture was different. I wanted my hair to be like other people. I wanted it to be quite straight because it is very hard to kind of maintain, but you kind of learn to love it. I think your hair is a massive part of who you are and your identity. And for instance, my braids is a massive part of who I am. It did take me a while to kind of embrace my hair and to love it. And now that I do, I can kind of express that through different styles that I do. For instance, like I said, my braids is a protective style that I love doing. And when you kind of embrace it, you also learn that it is not acceptable for people to come and touch your hair. When I was younger, I wasn't aware of these things. So I'm really glad that I'm aware of these things now.
With the best will in the world, it's impossible for any one individual to be a cultural expert and be well versed in the varying cultural and racial identities of all your student cohort. This is one of the many reasons why representation matters. A question for you. Who was your first black teacher? This is a question I ask often in my workshops and trainings, and you may or may not be surprised by how many people say they didn't have any black teachers. More could be done to recruit black teachers. Of the existing head teachers in Britain, only 1% are black. Proportionally, the percentage is also significantly low when you look at black head teachers and governors. Representation across the board is important. As a mother of two who has conducted many school visits, one of the first things I do is look at that staff wall, and it's so disheartening to see wall after wall of barely any diverse representation. In London, I hasten to add. And when there is, they are typically support staff. London is one of the most diverse cities. I will share with you an American example. Stay with me, it will hopefully become clear why. A black midwife shared a recent conversation with one of her white midwife colleagues about a mother who had just given birth. The conversation went something like this. White midwife says, "I'm not sure about the mom in cubicle A. I think we might need to call psych to do an assessment on her." Black midwife, "Oh really? Why?" White midwife, "Every time I've gone in there, she's banging her head. It's so odd. It's like she's self-harming." Random colleague chips in. "Do you think she's hearing voices?" Black midwife, "Is she black?" White midwife, "Yeah." Black midwife, "Does the head banging look something like this?" White midwife, "Yeah. How did you know?" Black midwife. Well, because for a lot of black women who wear weaves, braids, hair extension, if we can't get to the itch on our scalp, this is what we do. This black midwife highlighted the importance of showing curiosity and not being afraid to ask a gentle why. Now, imagine if the black midwife wasn't there. Imagine if the psych referral had been done. Imagine what it might have felt like for the mom who had just given birth to have a psych assessment. How might she have reacted? If she had been angry, upset, would that have been misinterpreted as aggressive or contributed to the psychological assessment of her? Bringing it back to the UK. UK examples of similar scenarios tend to be more subtle and often linked to inactions, such as missing signs of depression in black women, not believing black women about their bodies or being in pain. At the time of recording this, the current stats in the UK is that black women are 4 times more likely to die in labour and pregnancy and childbirth. This appears to be linked to systemic biases. You may be wondering how this links with schools and your role as a teacher. The short answer is intergenerational trauma and a mistrust of systems that weren't designed to consider all identities. A study by JAMA Pediatrics of more than 7 million school children shows that race, ethnicity, and socio-economic status influences who obtains an autism diagnosis or not. This highlights the subjective ways in which children's behaviors can be interpreted, assessed, and labeled. There has also been a spike in the number of diagnoses in teenagers, particularly girls. In my work as a therapist, it has sadly become quite common for black parents to tell me of their experiences of trying to convince schools to take their concerns about their child seriously. There is simply very limited research into the experience of black and Asian people and autism. We need to understand the experiences of autistic people and families from different backgrounds and cultures. For this to happen, we need decision makers and service providers to produce culturally appropriate and informed assessment and support. This is also why meaningful representation matters beyond a tick box exercise. With the case example I have given, if the psych assessment had proceeded and a diagnosis or label given or not given, it will no doubt have a psychological impact on the mom. This diagnosis can easily follow her and how professionals engage with her. For example, a lot of nurseries request to see a child's red book as proof of immunization at the time of starting nursery. I'm aware of nurseries therefore having access to other details in the red book. I can speak from personal experience on this. The teacher's perception of that parent would therefore be influenced, and that parent may also have a mistrust of the professionals. Positive parental relationship and collaboration is crucial in schools. I will explore this further shortly. It's also worth noting that children are a product of their environment. They are sponges. So actually, it's not unrealistic to think that a child will mirror and copy what is being done at home. So if, for example, a child was playing mums and dads and presented what is perceived as odd behaviors such as tapping the head, how would you assess that behavior? Are you taking into account the context? Context matters. Do not just rely on your individual frame of reference. Systems have to be put in place to ensure fair, balanced, and consistent practices. Representation also matters because every child deserves to see themselves represented across the board in your staffing structures, in the curriculum, in the authors of the books, in the academics being covered. It's highly beneficial for their psychological sense of well-being. Other children also need exposure to different cultures and identity in a meaningful way that representation can offer. A big part of creating a culturally inclusive environment in school is working collaboratively with parents. It's worth reviewing how you're engaging with parents. Is it a one-way street where you're leading the communication? Who are you spending time saying hello to and talking to at the school gates? What practices have you got in place within your school community that invites positive communication and collaboration with your parents? All too often, parents share with me their experiences of being patronized by school, staff talking at them rather than with them. You have professional experience and expertise. They have the experience and expertise on their child and their child's identity, as well as what's important to them as a family. Be led by parents when it comes to your inclusive practices. Conduct surveys, make use of feedback forms, hold community events and cultural days. Make note of significant cultural events and dates. Acknowledge them. We know that children exist within the context of their family and home lives. Ask questions about cultures and values and what's important to them on entry in your admission forms. State clearly why you're asking this. I'm aware of a school that shares their school's values and invite parents to share how that aligns with or differs with their own personal home values. Parents could be encouraged to share why they chose your particular school. You get a really good insight into your parent community when you include more open-ended questions in your assessments. It's also worth reflecting on how your parents' cohort understands your school systems. Are you taking your time to educate parents about the school and how things work in a school? Or are you assuming they do understand this? Also, consider language and literacy barriers in the information you share with parents. Family engagement is about working together and empowering parents to advocate for their child alongside yourselves.
I think, so as a Jamaican girl, as a Jamaican person, I think people have a lot of stereotypes for Jamaican people. They think we have like purely vulgar music that like has no purpose, that's just not even really good. And I think, you know, like bashment music, that type of music, I feel like is the only bashment music, and Bob Marley, like I feel like that's all people know about Jamaican music. But we have other types of music that like the lyrics aren't just about, you know, things like that. Like we've got music that talks about like real life things, you know what I mean? So I think that's quite ignored. I think people think that Caribbeans specifically, people think that they are a bit more stuck up maybe than like African people. Like people think they're grown up in a different way, a lot less harsh. And I think I'd agree with that, but just in a different way. Like I think we're not like we weren't grown to just you know, with like no curfews and no this, no that, and we can just do whatever we want. You know, we still had a strictness to our growing up. We're not just like carefree people who can do anything. And I think that kind of comes through with people's like expectations from me. Like they always think I can just do anything and take people places and do this and do that, but I can't just do that all the time.
If there was one thing I wish people could understand, it's that even though my culture, my identity is different to theirs, I'm still a person. I'm no different to you guys. It's not like I've got a superpower or anything like that. Still like you guys, just a little bit different in a sense.
What are the next steps for you to ensure you're being more inclusive as an organization and culturally competent as a professional? It starts with you. Start with yourself. What meaningful difference can you make? This will very much be influenced by the emotions evoked in you around talking about racial identity and racism. Model the behaviors you want to see in the pupils. They're watching you and they're seeing how you engage and interact with all pupils in the classroom. Address any gaps in your knowledge and awareness. expose yourself to different voices and lived experiences. Accept that this will be an ongoing learning process for you. Does your organization have inclusion and anti-racism policies and practices? Schools, with the help of the governing body, need to re-engage with their current practices through the lens of race and ethnicity. You might need a consultant who is a specialist in this field to support you with this. Or you could create a working group that has a diverse representation from students, staff, parents, and the local community. Don't limit awareness and understanding and celebration of Black identity and culture to Black History Month. Don't limit Black History Month to just sharing racial trauma. Consider the impact of what it means for your Black and brown peoples to be exposed to this. The only time they see representation shouldn't be in October, nor should they only be exposed to historic racial trauma. Black history is our history. Black history is happening now. Take on training to understand the specific vulnerabilities that Black and other minoritized children face in order for you to take a culturally responsive approach. Create anti-racism goals and values as an organization. They can include the following goals. Children to explore and accept difference. Children use appropriate language and around difference. Children will recognize unfairness and language to describe unfairness. Minority ethnic children need equity, not equality. This means being given a fair opportunity to thrive according to their unique needs. 95% of young Black British people have witnessed racist language in education. This is according to a report published by the YMCA in 2020. This will no doubt have an impact on their mental health and well-being, and it can cause racial trauma. It's critical that we do something meaningful to engage in the work of creating safe and inclusive spaces for children to feel a strong sense of belonging, as well as committing to developing our own cultural awareness and embedding anti-racist practices. Schools should be a safe and nurturing places for all children to be themselves, to grow, learn, and thrive. Whilst this presentation has been about the talk, I hope that it has galvanized you to move from the talk into action. Thank you.